Don't point your gun at me! Please!
I need to hear that.
Don't point, he's pointing his gun at me!
February 7th, 2020. The man you hear is Denzel Sutherland Wilson at the Gidendam checkpoint located on Wet'suwet'en land.
Take your gun off of me!
The people activists call settlers would call this kind of thing a blockade. Wet'suwet'en call it a defense against an invasion. The police see it as a criminal act and move in.
You have a choice today. You can be complicit in the destruction of the future for your own children, or you can do what's right.
20 kilometers up the road, the police raid the Unistoten camp. In total, 28 people are arrested.
We need some of the earth to be left alone. They don't have to take everything. And that's what we're doing. Our rights, our title, our jurisdiction, our authority, we constantly remind whether it's provincial or federal governments that they only have assumed and presumed authority. The authority lies with the Wet'suwet'en.
I pity the country, I pity the state.
Sit down!
I'm a man who thrives on hate. Smaller the lives.
It's the law, the rule of law, by removing those traps, and we'll continue to do that.
A bigoted news press, fascist town cry.
This truly is a historic moment. You've heard me say it many times, that no relationship is more important to Canada than the relationship with Indigenous peoples.
The Wet'suwet'en raid exposes the cracks in the facade of reconciliation and talks of nation-to-nation relationship.
They continue to harass and invade us constantly, and they've never stopped.
The Trudeau government has spent more on litigation against Indigenous nations than any other previous government. Canada is built on the resistance of Indigenous people. A patchwork of treaties, policies to pacify, subjugate, and assimilate. Indigenous people rue the shackles of that racist bit of legislation called the Indian Act, but in its push to rule resources, Canada is shackled by its own laws that require it to deal with Aboriginal rights and title and treaties. The honor of the Crown is at stake. We're going to take a deep dive into the 3 ways Indigenous people have chosen to fight. Negotiation.
They were standing up to a system. They were standing up to so much disparity in power.
The courts.
Today we are vindicated.
It allows us to be able to be sustainable again, to take care of ourselves.
On the day of the invasion, they just kept coming and coming. They had busloads of cops coming in.
And direct action. Different strategies, same message. We are here. This is who we are.
Then I am Chief Namox. I currently sit as the highest ranking chief of the Tsayu, the Beaver clan of the Wet'suwet'en Nation.
Chief Namox is our guide through Wet'suwet'en territory. The man knows his land, the names of every stream, every river, every mountain.
This was all open. That's where all the tents were. That's where the trading happened.
Namox is also part Gitxsan, historic allies to the Wet'suwet'en. A couple hundred years ago, the nations united to drive out invaders.
News press, fascist town cry. Deception annoys me. Deception destroys me. The Bill of Rights.
Dudley George was shot and killed by police outside IPPERWASH Provincial Park.
Frustrated our churchmen.
Canadian law has nothing to do with it because we are not Canadians. For one, we are not Canadians. We are Shuswap people.
The colonial governor.
Possession of those weapons is criminal, and we intend to deal with that.
They're seeking to draw me.
This ain't a surrender either.
Around us, all the lies.
They want people to get hurt over a golf course. The Native people are fed up with being pushed around and our land taken.
The
Constitution Express finally pulled into Ottawa Station. 500 Indians.
He's not laid down a good vision for us, and we don't want that vision. We don't want the destruction of our homelands.
The injunction gives the Quebec Indian Association time to organize its fight against the James Bay Agreement.
In 1969, the White Paper, Canada's Policy on Assimilation. First Nations fought back. In 1970, the newly formed Union of BC Indian Chiefs wrote its own brown paper, asserting Aboriginal title still existed. The Calder decision. For the first time, the Supreme Court of Canada acknowledged the existence of Aboriginal title, but was split on if it had been extinguished. The decision was in fact a tie. And in 1973, Yukon chiefs were prepared.
We are not here looking for a handout.
The plan was called Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow. In it, demands to regain control of land, education, health, and even communications.
You know, it was a different era. Our chiefs in 1973 literally came out of the bush, got on a plane, went to Ottawa.
Marilyn Jensen was born into this fight. Her mother, Doris McLean, was a young woman when land claims started, who later became chief of the Cargrass Tagish First Nation.
50 years ago, they were very young people. They were in their 20s. When I think of my childhood, I remember, that there was this great big terminology and concept that was happening all the time. It was called land claims. And our parents were really, really engaged in that process. And I have to admit, in those days, I didn't really understand what that meant.
The movement was led by Elijah Smith. Now the next part of this story has grown into legend. The elder saw a need for professionals, lawyers, accountants, negotiators. He handpicked youth and informed them that they were going to school, and a bunch of them listened.
They were people that experienced and lived oppression, every right stripped away from them. They conjured up the ability to, fight through that.
An undeniable social seismic shift. Then came the backlash, ugly and very public.
Would they not be satisfied if we gave them each a tent, a bow and arrow, and turned them loose on the land?
The natives of the Yukon believe very strongly and very deeply that it is their land.
Well, I believe it's my land too. I was born in Canada. I'm a Canadian.
Well, I was born in Canada too.
I had to struggle with that for a while, like that messaging so strongly coming from society to say that you're less than, you're bad, everything about you is wrong. And then my mom, every day, her message was exactly the opposite. We come from proud and noble people.
The 1973 Calder decision would pave the way for other negotiations and court challenges, including back in Wet'suwet'en territory, where Chief Nelmox guides us to Morristown.
My name is thousands of years old. As long as that sun is shining, that sky is blue, and that water runs, that's how strong my name is.
He was groomed all his life to be chief.
My grandmother was Chief Nelmox during my lifetime, and she took me under her wing. And when she passed on, my uncle lifted the name, and then he took me under his wing.
Nelmox insists their ways were never lost.
We're one of the last in Canada to have European contact. So even when they outlawed the potlatch as our feasting system, we simply did it on the territory. I'm very confident in my name. I know the history of it. We know where it comes from. We know where it started. We know who held it before. And it's never ever been lost, and there was never that disconnect.
The feast system is their law. It's how they govern. With rules and protocols intact, the Wet'suwet'en asserted they still controlled their territories. Once again, allied with the Gitxsan, they took Canada to court.
The Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en wanted to present this case themselves and through their own laws.
Lawyer Peter Grant had taken on rights cases before, but he felt this one could be historic.
Everybody thought we were crazy. Why would you do that? There's no recognition of that. But we pushed.
The legal fight started as a land claim, but it stalled.
They realized that all of their elders would be dead before they ever got near negotiations, and their rights were being denied. Their title to their territory was being denied.
The courts recognized hereditary leadership. That would reverberate through the decades to the Troubles in 2020.
We can Clifford Atleo Sr. from Ahouset.
Cliff Atleo Sr. was a fisherman, but his first battle would be on the land.
And in a nutshell, we didn't fight against logging. We fought against how they logged. We fought against these moonscapes being created of huge clear cuts.
It was an international cause célèbre to save old-growth forests in the Clayoquot Sound. 12,000 people showed up, 1,000 people arrested.
But we knew when we went down there we weren't coming back without an agreement. 40 straight days of negotiations. and we got a deal.
Considered a victory back then, but was it?
They quit funding it and our people allowed it to die.
The fight for rights is cradle to the grave. If you sign up, you're in for more than one skirmish. Just a few years later, Atleo turns his sights from the forest to the sea.
To me, it's an opportunity to get a way of life back that we had before contact, or even in the early days when I was young, 60 years ago. And what is that? It's standing on our own feet, making our living our way.
This battle lasts decades.
Where her body was going.
With Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chief Na'Moks as our guide, we arrive in Smithers, British Columbia.
Your name there, Jessica Mary Patrick?
The scenery is breathtaking, but the impact of colonialism left deep craters in the cultural landscape. A red dress hangs in honor of Jessica Patrick, a personal loss. As hereditary chief, a responsibility to raise awareness of issues like missing and murdered Indigenous women.
I have duties to look after the land, the air, the water, the people, and our culture, as all hereditary chiefs do. There are 5 clans within our nation, and there are 13 house groups within that. And those 13 house groups are the highest ranking chiefs of this nation.
The main business is conducted outside the office and in a feast hall. It was at the feast that they decided to oppose pipelines.
We aren't the utmost authority. We do have a final say, but we do it truly democratic. Everybody has a voice. Of course, you're not going to get everybody agreeing on everything. This is why we spend time to talk and understand.
We are no longer prepared to be tolerant of forked tongues.
In the Yukon, the chiefs negotiating land claims were Indian Act chiefs, not hereditary. Their goal, dump the Indian Act, but on their terms.
And Together Today for Our Children Tomorrow was, we want our people to be happy again. We want our people to be strong again.
Doris McLean went to residential school. Her daughter says she didn't talk much about that. She also went to the Indian TB hospital in Edmonton.
Once she told me that the dentist tried to assault her, she just fought back and told on him. And amazingly, he got in trouble. And she said after that she was treated really badly and differently. But, you know, like, that was just who my mom was. You know, like, she was a fighter.
No white man give us this culture.
Trauma shapes identity. But in the Yukon, in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, there were elders who still lived the old way. A living memory of life prior to contact, passed down to Doris McLean and then to her children.
At a very early age, I would say probably about 12 or 13, just to kind of land at that place and say, I am Tlingit and Tagish, and I don't care what anybody thinks. This is who I am.
Today, Marilyn Jensen is a professor of Indigenous Studies at Yukon University. When she looks back at her people's fight to dump the Indian Act, she says the battle wasn't just about rights and land. The first order of business was identity. and undoing the damage of enfranchisement. To get a job or join the army, for example, you signed away your rights.
Inline Quaket, and we're also Kagashtan. So this is the Dejitan pole. Then the government comes along and decides who is an Indian and who isn't. And then, devising a sneaky, really horrible way of making us, become really divided. Your status, you're not status.
In 1980, a few days of debate would unravel the mess made by the Department of Indian Affairs. For the purpose of land claims, the term non-status was abolished. Yukon First Nations still had to live with the Indian Act, but they decided who their people were. A victory. The Wet'suwet'en traditional territory is 22,000 square kilometers. The rivers and streams feed two major salmon-bearing rivers, the Fraser and the Skeena.
Well, the trop's right out, so we got something.
In 2017, I visited the Unistoten camp. So how long you guys been trapping here?
4th year now.
Well, my grandpa trapped here probably about 40 years or more, and there were people here before him.
Frida Hewson lived out here to occupy the territory, to protect it from pipeline development, but she was also reconnecting to her roots. This is what was at stake in the DELGAMUUKW case.
It was absolutely exciting to get into. The first GITSAN witness was the late Cleam Laha, Martha Brown.
The testimony was unlike any other testimony heard in a Canadian court.
She was born in the 1890s. She talked about her mother explaining when these strange people came over a hill in the Kispioks, and they were the first white man. So we're talking about a system that was intact from that time.
Lawyer Peter Grant calls the arguments from the government offensive.
Pete Muldoon was cross-examined, and in the course of it, he's this old fella, very big, very strong. He walked the land. He was a very powerful man. Do you eat ice cream? Yeah, I eat ice cream. Now, what was that all about? It was that they were attacking that on the basis of accepting Western things such as ice cream or windows in their houses or driver's licenses, that they'd given up their title and rights.
The First Nations lost in provincial court. The ruling disturbed many. Chief Justice McEachran refused to accept oral traditions as evidence and described traditional lifestyles as nasty, brutish, and short.
We wanted for nothing when I was growing up.
Growing up in a house, Cliff Atleo Sr. knew what he wanted to be.
I grew up as a fisherman. That's all I knew. All I dreamed about was owning my own fishing boat. That never ever happened.
As an adult, he witnessed the industry disintegrate before his eyes.
We had more boats in the harbor when I was growing up than we have in all the boats of NUU-CHAH-NULTH today. That's all 15 tribes. More in that one village in the 50s than we have today.
The NUU-CHAH-NULTH come from the west coast of Vancouver Island. Historically, they were whalers and fishermen. Their economy built on the bounty from the sea. In the mid-90s, the nation proposed a $100 million habitat restoration plan, figuring they could get a deal at the land claims table, something that had just recently started in British Columbia.
We were looking just to actually have a say in management and actually help the government, because all you have to do is look all the way around BC and see the state of the salmon resource. The government really, they had no intention of negotiating.
The nation grew impatient.
It was all of 2 years when we said, that's it, no more. We're going to court.
It would take years to prepare a case. Then in 2003, they were ready, suing both Canada and BC for the right to harvest and sell their catch. It's a gamble. The NUU-CHAH-NULTH had to prove trade in fish existed prior to contact and show it was integral to the community. The government argued because there was no profit recorded and the exchange of goods took place at social or ceremonial gatherings, this did not constitute trade.
Oh, it was awful. They actually said we didn't exist. And that was a provincial statement formally presented in the courts of this goddamn land of theirs. We do not exist.
It's a strategy the government has not given up on.
And they're making the same kind of arguments with NUU-CHAH, who are doing this title case.
Silly civil servants, they thrive off my body.
A victory here,
The trip is with power.
another fight over there.
You know, how are we going to make a living? How our family's going to survive?
Police, they arrest me. Materialists test me. Pollution, it chokes me.
It's so frustrating to see these incidences still happening.
Politicians exploit me.
It's not just.
City life that jades me. Hudson Bay fleece me.
You know, they're treated like terrorists, and lots of times on their own land bases.
Government is bumbling. Revolution's rumbling.
When you see incidents like that going on, you know, it almost feels like we're just back at square one.
I pity the country.
In 1997, the DELGAMUUKW decision. The Supreme Court of Canada ruled oral traditions should be allowed as evidence, but the Wet'suwet'en and Gitxsan had claimed Aboriginal title.
That case did not ultimately bring a result for change on the ground for the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan. Now, that case, of course, DELGAMUUKW, is known throughout the Western world and has led Indigenous fights and struggles all around the world. Paradoxically, I think other places have been able to use that in Australia, in other places, and in other nations more powerfully than what's happened with the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan.
DELGAMUUKW started as a way to protect the land from logging. Now new corporate interests threaten the land. The pipeline. Frida Hewson set herself on a collision course with police because the court case left the crucial questions up in the air.
We're still using these trap lines, what our ancestors used, and that's what they're trying to wipe out.
On the other hand, the recommendation to negotiate has been ignored for over 20 years.
This country was founded on systemic racism. I mean, and that's not going to change overnight.
Which is why we find ourselves here.
Take your gun off of me!
You could hear it in his voice. He was asking them to be human. Don't be a machine. Don't be a robot of industry.
Next week, part 2 of Down the Barrel. 1 year later, we return to the checkpoint. What's the first image that comes into mind when you walk up to the bridge here?
Violence that came at us. And also what they introduced to the land. There was never violence here before. And yet the RCMP brought it to us.